Why can't we see the pictures he's showing?
Yeah, no, they showed nothing. Not even the CCTV.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
And she takes her last breath, and she leaves this earth
Not one
knowing
thing.
that Collin Griffith, her own son, murdered her. I'll have a chance to talk to you, ladies and gentlemen, after the defenses with a much shorter wrap up. I appreciate your time. I appreciate your attention. And when you come back through those doors, you should come back with nothing short of pure 100% justice. And that's finding the defendant guilty as charged of both counts for what he did to his mom on September 8th, 2024.
Where do they get the kidnapping stuff from? Like, okay, he dragged her inside, but how's that kidnapping?
Held against her will.
Oh, it's a bit of a
In
reach,
the
isn't it?
commission of a felony.
Yeah.
They look like they're at church.
They do, don't they? See how his tie matches her dress?
Mm-hmm.
Isn't that snappy?
I am a fan of olive green.
Yes, I don't mind olive green.
We'd like you to focus on the emotion and the drama rather than on the actual facts.
So is she a hottie or not, Udaf?
In this case. What's your job as jurors? It's to decide whether the state has proved beyond a reasonable doubt that Collin kidnapped and murdered his mother.
I thought he liked blondes too.
And that her death was not
I don't think he's actually
excusable or
fussy.
justified. That's your job.
Actually,
We start with
we've got to get
presumption
some
of
goss off
innocence,
you to
as the
have
judge
too.
will remind you again when he reads the instructions. That means that you have to believe that Collin is innocent, unless and until the state can overcome that presumption with evidence beyond the exclusion of a reasonable doubt. Not
Well, she was dead and he did it.
say characterizations of how things might have happened, but actual facts.
Oh, lime green, Elizabeth. That's a bit 70s.
Interpretations of how you should look at various facts.
She has nice hair, but she's not a hottie, hey, Uda?
It's your job to decide what the facts are and what they mean.
No, because she's in defense.
And whether the state has used those facts beyond a reasonable doubt that Collin is guilty of anything.
Pink is my favorite color, Teresia.
I've been here for over a week now, and they presented a lot of exhibits and evidence. I'm not going to go through all of the witnesses and all of the exhibits.
I like teal or aqua, which I don't know.
I'll be back there in the jury room with you. So
some people call it teal, some call it aqua, but it's a bluey-green color. More green than blue.
Even if they weren't all played.
That's a nice color.
You can listen to things. You can watch the ring video. That will be up to you. Those are facts. The witnesses.
Yeah, even her mother testified against the daughter.
Surprising. I'm not going to argue to you that the state's witnesses were unreliable or that you shouldn't believe them, with one exception.
Her mother tested against who?
Most of the witnesses,
the victim,
were pretty straightforward in answering the questions. Like I said,
what do you mean?
How to?
So the mother that he killed, her mother, his grandmother, testified on his behalf about how bad he was.
Oh, okay. Did he have any siblings?
I don't think so.
Oh, okay.
I don't think so. Oh, I've got to go
interpret what they said.
Okay.
One exception, and it might not even matter in the long run to your inquiry, your decision. Because for the most part, what the witnesses told you isn't in dispute. And that one exception is Robert Wolantis.
You could get beyond the idea of it being a hottie.
I have seemed harsh with him when I questioned him, and I apologize for that. I wouldn't wish the death of a child on anyone ever. But Mr. Wolantis wanted you to believe that he was very close with Kathy and with Collin, and that he was close enough with Collin that Collin confided in him several months before Kathy died. So how close was Robert Wolantis? with Collin and Kathy. He was not invited to Kathy's celebration of life. He didn't even know that she hadn't been buried. If you recall him going on and on about how funerals are for those left behind. And that's not to say that, it's not to say anything bad about Mr. Wolantis, but it's something you can consider in evaluating the credibility of his testimony. He went on one trip with Kathy a few years ago that Susan paid for. He talked to Collin on the phone a total of 3 times, unless you believe that there was a second mysterious phone that Mr. Wolantis claimed that he talked to Collin all the time on for either every week or every other week. There's no evidence of that. Susan told you about a phone that she got for Collin when Kathy had kicked him out one of the several times that she bought for him to use because he'd been kicked out without his phone. It was active for a couple of weeks. It's another thing you can consider in deciding whether you think Robert Wolantis was reliable. You also have to consider whether Robert Wolantis was trying to make himself seem more intimately connected with his daughter's life and his grandson's life, and now with Kathy's death. Remember, he was the one who called Polk County Sheriff's Office. He was not the go-to family member that the detectives wanted to speak to get information. They didn't seek him out. He reached out to them. And he reached out to them only weeks after Kathy died. Not right away, not, oh my goodness, my daughter died. I have this important information that may help in the investigation. No, it wasn't until after he watched Grady Judd's press conference that was extremely detailed in describing the wounds that Kathy suffered and how she died that Mr. Wolantis called the sheriff's office. You can consider that in determining whether you think his testimony is reliable. You can also consider the language he used in describing what Collin said to him, allegedly, about wanting to slit his mother's throat and watch the blood and life seep from her. You've heard Collin's words several times on the 911 call, on the Ring videos. That sound like something Collin would say, or a way he would describe anything that he says? Or does that sound like Mr. Wolantis putting words in Collin's mouth?
Well, that's an interesting point of view.
All that to say, even if you believe Mr. Wolantis, which I urge you not to believe what he said, he claims Collin told him, but even if you do, that does not prove beyond a reasonable doubt.
It does sound like something you would say.
And you have to remember that too. That's what the state has to prove to you. So dealing with that one witness, let's move on to the charges against Collin. The kidnapping. The state has to prove to you beyond a reasonable doubt that Collin, by force, threat, or secrecy, confined, abducted, or imprisoned or isolated Kathy against her will. And at the time he supposedly did any of those things, at that time, he had the intent to commit great bodily harm or terrorize her. Okay? So what did the state present to try to convince you that there was a kidnapping? They presented the witnesses, the neighbors, Sally Bell and Nancy K. Jones. Both of them are neighbors of Susan's. You've seen the photos of where they lived. And you heard them say that Kathy was the one being aggressive right when she arrived. She whipped the car out of the driveway to pull it up against the curb or the grass. She slammed her car door. She slung her backpack over her back and she marched up to the door and went inside. Went inside that house of her own accord. When she comes back out of the house, she's throwing things into Collin's car. And you can see in the photo of the interior of his car, there's clothes thrown in the back and there's his computer and his phone on the front seat. And she's yelling and gesturing and stomping around. And then she goes back up to where Collin is standing in the doorway. Because remember, neither of those witnesses told you he was ever anywhere other than in the doorway. Not in the mulch where an AirPod was found, but in the doorway around the corner. So Kathy comes up to him. She's making a scene, obviously a scene that's loud enough, noticeable enough that the neighbors are looking to see what's going on. She's already drawn their notice. And as she's on the carport floor and Colin's standing in the doorway and she's still gesturing, he puts his hand, and the witnesses differ, on her neck area, on her shoulder, by her ponytail. And they said pulled her inside, not dragged, not grabbed her by the ponytail, more like, and this is something you can decide, more like an ushering, like, oh crap, you're causing a scene, like Kathy can, seeing it in the state's own evidence. Let's bring this inside so that we don't get the wrath of the neighbors up or cause attention to be drawn even more to our argument. That's a more reasonable interpretation of those facts.
Did you see that
It's
footage?
reasonable to interpret that Collin was embarrassed by his mom and didn't want to air their dirty laundry in the carport.
He politely dragged her by her hair. How do you sort that
Let
out?
go, you're hurting me. Okay, that's a fact. That she said that is not in dispute. But you can't just accept a statement by anyone, but let alone by Kathy at face value. Okay, so she claims, you're hurting me, let go. Does she pull away from him? Nope, witnesses never said anything about that. Did she try and stay at the bottom of the steps where she was gesturing at him? No, the witnesses didn't say that. They said that her feet actually moved up the steps. That indicates a willingness to go inside. That's a reasonable interpretation of what those witnesses told you. Did she say, I don't want to go back inside? No. Did she grab onto Collin in some way to get him to let go of her? No. Did it even look like she was actually being hurt? Don't you think, isn't it reasonable that if Sally Bell or Nancy K. Jones thought that Kathy was actually being harmed in any way whatsoever, that they wouldn't have either called 911? Kay Jones would have called Susan because remember, she was house sitting. She was aware that Collin was allowed to be there, that he had arrived the day before, his car hadn't moved. So she's sort of keeping an eye on the house. If either of them thought that Kathy was actually being harmed or being forced to do something against her will, don't you think, as the good neighbors that they were, they would have alerted someone? They didn't, because Kathy's saying she was being hurt and let me go, and they don't know her. But I think you can interpret that statement from Kathy, knowing what you know about Kathy, as being just one of the many things that she claimed happened that didn't actually happen. For instance, when she said on one of her multiple phone calls to Susan or in a text to Collin, there are a lot, so I'm sorry if I don't remember exactly where it came from. She said, I'm scared, Collin, you battered me or you hit me or you beat me before you left on Sunday. Remember the ring videos in every room in the house except the bathroom. And for the most part, she and Collin are on ring video. The state has given you some ring video. The defense has given you some additional ring video to sort of fill it out a little bit better. On none of that ring video is Collin ever touching her. So isn't it reasonable that even though she claimed Collin hit her, beat her, struck her before he left the house on September 7th, and there's no proof of that, that her saying, hurt me, let go, was just her making something else up? There's another reasonable interpretation of Kathy saying, you're hurting me, let go. Remember, she was furious with Susan, with her mom, like furious. You heard her yell several times on the ring video at Susan. She was pissed off that Susan had let Collin come to her house, which, as you may recall, I asked several witnesses about this. And the reason I asked them about this is because I wanted it to be clear that it was permissible.
The neighbours were probably used to carrying on, so they just ignored it.
Probation officer, who he emailed. It was permissible to the courts. You saw the pink paper that Kathy tried to make a big deal out of that said Collin may go to visit his grandmother out of county, just notify the probation officer. It was permissible under the 751 plan, the concurrent custody. There was nothing anywhere or in anyone's mind, except perhaps Kathy's, that said that Collin was not allowed to be at Susan's. Nevertheless, Kathy's pissed at her mom because Collin is at her house and hasn't come home as quickly as she demanded. Remember, she'd also made some threats to Susan in her text, saying, your HOA hates you, and Freddie, Susan's dog, doesn't have a dog tag, and that's a violation. A violation of what? I don't know. But Kathy's mad enough at Susan at this point that who knows, maybe she was trying to get Susan in trouble with her homeowners association by causing a bigger scene than it actually was. I'm not saying that's for sure what happened. I'm giving you reasonable interpretations of Kathy's behavior. But the bottom line is that there's no evidence that Kathy did anything against her will that day. And certainly no evidence beyond a reasonable doubt that she went back into the house that she'd already been in on her own, despite Collin touching her neck, her hair, her ponytail. She was not being dragged. She was not being forced. Plus, once she's in the house, the state has one theory of what may have happened. I'm going to propose some other, I would argue, more reasonable ones. When she's inside the house, she has access to her phone, right? She has access to car keys.
Yeah, if my kids don't answer the
Doors
phone,
are
they know
unlocked.
how
Would
cranky
Susan
that
say
gets
the doors
me.
are kept
Why do they have a
unlocked? And then
phone?
Collins stay on the 911 call when law enforcement first arrived and they're knocking on the door saying sheriff's office. He says, come in, the door's unlocked. There's no evidence that Kathy was kept in that house against her will. None. In fact, to the contrary, Collin would have been probably really happy if Kathy had left. No one wanted her to have come there. And knowing what you know about Kathy, don't you think it's reasonable that if she had been forced to go back inside against her will, that she wouldn't have fought tooth and nail to avoid doing what she didn't want to do? Remember, this is somebody that the state's own witness, Detective Zanoniani, said it's either her way or the highway. So, knowing what you know about Kathy, if she was being forced to do something against her will, it's reasonable she would have fought it, right? The state himself said, it doesn't look like there was a long drawn out fight throughout the house. If Kathy didn't want to be back in that house, how did her flip-flops make it all the way to the kitchen? If Kathy didn't want to be back in that house, she would have been flailing like she had been doing just talking to Collin before. And if she had been forced to go back into that house and then forced to go to the kitchen and forced not to leave, the house wouldn't have been in as pristine a condition as you saw. The plant would have been knocked over. Something would have been amiss. Didn't have any evidence from the medical examiner either to say she had any scalp wounds or anything indicating that she had been pulled by the hair. Not to mention the fact that, is it reasonable to you that Collin, despite what the prosecutor says, even though there's no evidence of how tall he is, how much he weighs, you've seen him in court.
Sorry.
You've seen a picture of him shirtless.
Whew.
If you believe
If you
that
could hear my
Collin could
stomach,
have made
Lord.
his mother do anything physically, I don't know what else to tell you. I'm not going to be able to convince you of anything. And if you think that Collin was dragging her by the hair, as the state seems to want you to believe, throughout that house, how come her flip-flops didn't come off right at the front door? Collin didn't make Kathy do anything. Oh, but the AirPods, the one in the mulch, that proves that Collin made Kathy do something against her will. BS. No witness ever saw Collin in the mulch. They never saw him anywhere other than the doorway. But they saw Kathy march her way up from her car to the doorway. Isn't it reasonable that as she's pissed off at Collin, comes in hot and angry, that it fell out while she was just being herself? Same with the ones in the house. Once again, if Collin was ever forcing her to do anything physically against her will, and that AirPod came out because of something he did, you think she would have just been like, okay, I'm going to let you keep dragging me, instead of flailing about and, like I said, knocking something amiss in the house? No, that's not reasonable, because none of that ever happened. There was no kidnapping, period. The felony murder count, just also first-degree murder. If you were to find Collin guilty of that, that would mean you have to find beyond a reasonable doubt that he kidnapped Kathy and that during that kidnapping, he caused her death. So I've already told you all the reasons why I think the state has utterly failed to prove a kidnapping. But even if you did find that, because I don't want to presume that you're going to find anything. I'm here to make suggestions, not to tell you how to do your job, like the prosecutor was trying to do. That hour and 15 minutes between when the neighbor saw Collin usher his mother inside as she's making a scene and when he called 911 distraught, you would have to believe that Collin forced Kathy to stay in that house that entire hour and 15 minutes and was inflicting some bodily harm or terrorizing her that whole time. That's not reasonable. There was no kidnapping, and this was no felony murder. This was self-defense. So the state wants you to believe that this was a premeditated murder. In order to do that, once again, they have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Collin intended to kill her and beyond a reasonable doubt that he was not acting in self-defense. That's what you would have to find. I heard a lot of outrage from the prosecutor in his closing statement. And this is an awful situation. But there was no outrage about how Kathy had behaved, how Kathy had treated her son, how she had treated other people. And I'm not saying you have to have outrage at that. You've heard a lot of unfavorable things about Kathy. And I am not going to go through every single one because you took notes, you heard and saw, you heard from the state's own witnesses, those things. Susan confirmed them. But remember, the incidents that you heard about Kathy being violent in the past or making things up in the past were all corroborated, either by police reports, DCF reports that Detective Zanoniani had reviewed, or by witnesses, by Susan. I was not presenting those to you to just bash Kathy, to make her look like a horrible person. To the contrary, I was doing my job because the law says, and the judge will tell you, that you have to consider prior acts of violence, prior acts of aggression, a reputation for dangerous and violent behavior in deciding whether Collin was reasonable in defending himself against his mom on September 8th. I'm not going to read the instruction in detail because, like I said, the judge will do that for you. But the law requires you to consider what Collin knew about his mom to decide whether you think he acted reasonably in defending himself. You have to decide the reasonableness of Collin's actions in light of all of those things. In light of the fact that she had pulled a gun on him before, in light of the fact that she had threatened to kill other people before, in light of the fact that she had attacked other people before with weapons. Some of these things in front of Collin. So it's not even just hearing about it, it's witnessing it. He knew all those things about her. He knew what she was capable of when she was angry. He knew all of this, and it was in his mind when she came to him on September 8th. Collin also knew that Kathy would sometimes make things up to hurt other people, such as he knew that she claimed someone strangled her. She even claimed that she had video of it, but when the police reviewed it, it showed you she was strangling herself. He knew that she had called DCF on her own brother, got them involved in an investigation that was baseless. He knew that his mom claimed to do everybody else's schoolwork, including her own mother's dissertation for her PhD. He knew this about his mother. And luckily, those threats and made-up stories that Kathy had told in the past didn't ever result in any serious consequences for those people. But Kathy had never suffered the consequences of making those stories up either. And what happens when you don't suffer consequences? You continue the behavior. And sometimes she was actually even believed when she made things up. One glaring example. The day that she pulled the gun on Collin, threatened to shoot him or herself, and then handed him the gun and said, just shoot me, Collin immediately tells his teacher or professor, who talks to the school resource officer, who gets the deputies involved. The deputies go to Kathy at her house. And Kathy says, no, I never pulled a gun. What? He's just being a brat. He was failing classes, so I disciplined him by taking away his phone and his AirPods. And they believed her. Okay. Now, at the time, maybe that wasn't so astonishing. But remember what Susan told you. Susan told you that Kathy admitted to her that she had actually pulled a gun on Collin. So Kathy lied to the police. She also lied about him failing his classes. That was never true. And convinced them that Collin was just being a brat. Despite the fact that Collin had given a detailed account of what his mother did to him with her gun, they didn't believe him. They believed that he was just being a brat. Don't get me wrong, Collin could be a brat. I am not trying to make him look like an angel and Kathy look like the devil. You heard him on the Ring video and how he talked to his mom. Disrespectful, absolutely. But that doesn't make him a murderer. Also, look at his role model. That sounds awful, but we all talked about in jury selection that kids kind of do what they know. Their parents are their role models. Their parents teach them by not only talking to them, but by their own behavior. They cussed back and forth at each other. Is it an ideal parental-child relationship? No, but that's how they existed. You heard Kathy cussing at a number of people, including her mom, and cussing and claiming Collin had put a lid on her cup too tight and that it caused her to cut her hand.
Yeah, it's the future you got to worry about there, Elizabeth and Teresia. If he's done this now, gets married in the future.
So even though
100% right, girls.
be a brat and disrespectful to his mom, but what 17-year-old isn't at times, you cannot ignore the fact that Kathy told her mom, yeah, I lied to the police. I actually did pull a gun. You cannot ignore that fact. And it was in response to his mother pulling a gun on him that Collin started making these statements that the state has conveniently termed threats, but without wanting you to consider all of the words in those statements. And that was the same incident where Kathy lied to the police about not pulling a gun on Collin. Remember, he ends up Baker acted because he begins the litany of times that he said, I don't feel safe with my mom. I'm afraid what she'll do to me. I'm afraid if she pulls a gun on me again, I'll have to defend myself. If she does those things that we now know she did, I will defend myself. You even saw him on body-worn camera footage telling the officers that if she does this to me again, if she punches me, if she attacks me, I will defend myself. I'm afraid I don't feel safe at home. But no one would listen. Over and over and over, he tells people in authority this. They believe Kathy, they don't believe him. I want to propose a possible reason why they didn't listen to him. Once they found out that he had been arrested for a shooting death in Oklahoma, despite the fact that he was never charged with that, everybody decided, we can't believe him. We have to believe her. Look at his past. And that is an awful shame.
Don't you have a statute of limitations or something, Uta Hef? How long would that be?
How Kathy behaved.
No, they can charge him.
Words to her mother that she pulled a gun on.
They charged this. They charged bloody
people in authority ignored Kathy's well-documented.
What's her name? The chick that just got no mercy. They charged her 5 years. Like, exhumed his body 5 years down the track. This actually only happened in September last year. It's the quickest murder trial ever.
Oh, really?
History of violence.
But do you think he should really go to jail, or do you think he should go to a rehabilitation nut house something?
Yeah.
Oh, not for murder. Is there everything? Is there one for everything else to have?
Well-documented history of aggression and volatility and impulsivity. They ignored the fact that she owned a gun. They ignored the things she had done to her ex-husband. They ignored that she had stabbed him and burned him and pinned him to the house. This is all in police reports and DCF reports. They just ignored it. And these are just the documented episodes that we know about of Kathy being violent towards others. You saw how she acted on her own Ring video, right? And this is her knowing she's being recorded. So if that's how she behaves when she knows she's being recorded, think about what she might do when she's not being recorded.
Any instructions?
We also know she beat Collin with a belt in front of her own mother. And when Susan tried to intervene, she tried to claim that law enforcement had sanctioned that behavior. She claimed that Corporal Rentas told her it was okay. Well, you heard from Detective Zanoniani that law enforcement would never sanction such a thing. The day before Kathy died, you've seen the Ring video. You saw that she and Collin had an argument about putting up the bookshelf. You saw that he was disrespectful to her.
Heard that.
But you also saw that her reaction to that was to kick him out, which she lied about later too. She claims on the phone with her mom on the Ring video, I never kicked him out. I never kicked him out. I never kicked him out. Watch the Ring video again. Listen to her words. Get out and don't come back, even if you're bawling your eyes out. Beyond that, give me your house keys. She took his keys to get back into the house that he lived in. You can't see it in the States Ring video that they played, but I admitted a defense exhibit that we only played a short clip from, but it's longer. You can watch it if you don't trust me or don't believe me. But in that clip that you didn't see, but is in evidence, it shows the view from the living room. And it shows her actually taking the keys from Collin and putting them on the hook inside the door. And then her closing the door and locking it behind him. And you may also remember that the key ring that was on the kitchen at Susan's house was just a car key with no house keys on it. Yeah, those were to Collin's
4 minutes.
car. No house keys. So she kicks him out over him not helping with the bookshelf. Should he have helped her? Probably. But was it so unreasonable to think that if you put up a bookshelf that's not anchored to studs that it might be a problem? So all of this is going to Collin's state of mind the day before Kathy comes to him at Susan's house. It's something you must consider when you're deciding whether the state has proved with facts and evidence beyond a reasonable doubt that Collin wasn't reasonably defending himself against his mother on September 8th. And would a reasonable person defend themselves like Collin did? Sort of on a separate note, the state has argued that the text that Kathy sent to Collin, threatening all sorts of things, because you know she threatened all sorts of things that were not true, right? I won't go through all of them. But that this text where she says she's going to send all these Ring videos of him supposedly confessing to planning a murder in Oklahoma, that provides a motive for Collin to want to kill his mom. Okay, first of all, you have to believe that the threat was true. Given what you know about Kathy, given the fact that no one's seen any Ring videos of any such nature, and given the fact that Collin has never been charged with anything in Oklahoma, and given the fact that her deadline of 3 p.m. when she was going to supposedly send these to all these
Arriving
people
now
had long passed before she got to Collin, isn't it reasonable to think this is just another thing that she made up? Because if those things existed, they'd be out there. They would have been in front of you. And don't you think Collin knew that that was an empty threat? Knew that no such recordings existed? So this big motive that the state wants you to believe in, also BS. Just another one of her delusional lies. Something else she made up, like she made up things all the time, and that the state's own evidence proves to you. Then you have to think, even if you believe that the threat was true or real, beyond a reasonable doubt, you have to believe that Collin somehow made her come to him so that he could kill her. And that's just absurd. Kathy made the choice to go to where he was. And let's face it, Collin had been trying to escape his mother for quite some time, for at least a year that we know of, since September of 2023, when he got put in the Baker Act facility for something his mom did and lied about, when he said, "I don't feel safe." And that's what he was trying to do on September 8th when she kicked him out. On September 7th when she kicked him out. He was trying to escape her. Think about this. All the times that you've heard about Collin saying, "I don't feel safe. If my mom attacks me, I'll defend myself. If she comes at me, if she pulls a gun on me, if she punches me, I'll defend myself." Remember, Collin told people that he would rather be in the Baker Act facility than at home with his mother. He told people in authority he would rather be in jail than at home with his mother. He told people in authority he would rather be in foster care than at home with his mother. And the state wants you to believe that Collin's just a brat who didn't like the discipline he got, so he murdered his mom. That's also absurd. Because as the state has pointed out many times, Collin had what they think is a great life with mom, right? So he gets to go on trips. Absolutely got to go on trips. He lives in a clean, nice, organized home with plenty of food.
That she demanded her mother
He has
pay
a
for.
phone. He has an Xbox. He has a computer. He gets to go to college. Don't you think Collin, as smart as he was to be able to graduate early, would know that if he actually were to be placed in the Baker Act facility instead of going home with his mom where he didn't feel safe, or remain in jail instead of going home with his mom with whom he didn't feel safe, or went into foster care instead of going home with his mom with whom he didn't feel safe, he would get none of those wonderful things. None of them. He would not have a phone. He would not have an Xbox. He would not go on trips all over the country or the world. And yet he still said, "Please, re-Baker Act me. Please, don't send me home from jail with my mom. Please, I'd rather go to foster care." These are the things you know, and that the state has proved. Collin was trying to escape his mom because he was scared. He was scared of what she would do to him, and if she attacked him, what he would do in response. So, knowing all that, let's talk about September 8th. Kathy went to where Collin was. Isn't it reasonable to believe, because let's be clear, the state has offered no proof, zero proof of what actually happened in Susan's house on September 8th? None. Zero proof does not equal proof beyond a reasonable doubt. But isn't it reasonable to believe that Kathy, in her anger, her desperation to make Collin come home, that she picked up a knife and threatened him with it, which is in total conformance with how she's acted in the past? Absolutely, it's reasonable. The state wants you to think, despite any proof, that Collin dragged his mother to the kitchen, somehow kept her there against her will, either by beating her or holding her by the ponytail, and then somehow managed to get a knife out of the butcher block while still holding on to Kathy, such that she couldn't get away, to start this fight over the knife. That's absurd. And it certainly hasn't been proved beyond a reasonable doubt. Isn't it more reasonable, given everything you know, that Kathy picked up the knife, threatened Collin with it, and he defended himself, as he's been saying he would do for a year. Isn't it also reasonable that Kathy knew what the outcome was going to be when she picked up a knife and threatened Collin with it? You've heard of suicide by cop? Isn't it reasonable to think that Kathy committed suicide by son? She had never been able to successfully commit suicide before, despite her many attempts. Isn't it reasonable that she pulled a knife on Collin, knowing that if she attacked him, that he would defend himself and that the end result might be that she died? I'm not saying that that's what was in her mind, because we don't know what was in her mind. I'm saying that it's a reasonable possibility given everything you know about her. It's also a reasonable possibility.
That's a bit of a leap, isn't it?
That she attacked Collin with a knife.
It's a bit of a leap to jump that she did death by son, like death by cop kind of thing,
Yeah.
It's a bit of a leap, that is.
I agree.
Dr. Garavan talked to you a little bit about
I was actually reading
and how a struggle.
Teresia's comment. And that's a perfectly reasonable thing to do. But he tried to do that by going to the grandma's, and she demanded he came back. That's the issue. There was no swaying her. She was adamant. That's it. Rain, hail, or shine, no matter what I have to do, that's it. You're coming home.
Over a weapon can result in both people with wounds, which is what you see here. Exactly what you see here. You also, most of you in jury selection mentioned that self-defense is a right that each of us has. And those of you who own guns said that they keep them.
I'll share mine with
nearby,
you, Teresia.
often for protection. And I said, protection from what? You said, if someone comes into my house and attacks me, I can protect myself and my family. So isn't it reasonable that that's what Collin did here? When Kathy came into the house where he was
yes, I agree. That is
living
bullshit.
for all intents and purposes at that point,
that's pushing
and that
it.
she attacked him with a knife, that he defended himself, as was his right.
Yeah, I don't think she expected him to kill her.
At no level, let alone beyond a reasonable doubt, that Collin picked up the knife and attacked Kathy with it. That means you have to try and figure out, if there's no evidence of exactly what happened, you have to think about what was reasonable. And it makes way more sense, given what you know, that Kathy attacked Collin and he defended himself. They tried to get you to believe that Collin was rage-filled and hate-filled, and all of these malicious thoughts were geared towards his mom. If you believe that beyond a reasonable doubt, don't you think there'd be more than just one wound on Kathy? Sorry, she had two wounds. She had the neck wound and she had the hand wound. Those could have happened at the same time. You don't know whose hands were on what part of the knife during this struggle. If Collin was so rage-filled and had such hatred for his mom, don't you expect that there would be 5, 10, 20 stab wounds? That's something you can consider too. So the state played.
You think there would be more stab wounds?
And they want you to believe that that proves beyond a reasonable doubt that Collin,
if it was rage-filled, yeah, for sure,
wasn't just defending himself.
For sure.
You can believe or disbelieve what Collin said. If you don't believe what Collin said, that still doesn't mean that the state has proved beyond a reasonable doubt that he murdered his mother. Remember that. Also consider that Collin said there was a long fight and she fell on the knife. Knowing his history, don't you think of not being believed by people in authority repeatedly, that yeah, he may have not told the entire truth
Did anyone
because he was scared.
testify where?
That doesn't make him a murderer.
Hang on. Has anyone testified where they found blood on his clothes? Like what part of his clothing was the blood located in? Can anyone remember?
Nope.
Hmm.
I can go look it up though.
I think because it was premeditated, there's only one wound.
Well, she just said there's two.
No, but what we're saying is that if it's a rage-filled killing, it's normally more than one.
That's
the
right.
point.
Yeah.
But if he's like got like blood around his, like the collar of his shirt and stuff, it depends where that is, where the blood has fallen onto him as to where he was when it happened. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I get you.
Yeah. And, you know, what, you want one bullet or do you want to empty the clip?
Empty the clip every time.
Yeah. You're going to have the same job. If you're good.
Especially because when he went to the people who are supposed to protect him, law enforcement, doctors, DCF, and said, my mom attacked me with a gun. My mom pulled a gun on me. I don't feel safe. I'm afraid. I'll defend myself.
That's good parenting, isn't it?
And then believing her when she says absolutely never happened. He's just being a brat. Don't you think he might be a little scared when he's talking to his 911 operator? Not to mention the possible shock because of what he had been through in a struggle over a knife with his own mom. And let's not forget the one wound to Kathy's neck. State wants you to believe that it was some vicious, forceful, rage-filled wound. But remember what Dr. Garavan said? He said that it actually doesn't take much force to go through the soft tissue in the neck.
There's a way you can write it. Use letters and numbers.
Biggest point of resistance is the skin itself.
Depends how sharp an eyeball
Get
is.
creative.
Even less if
Come
the
on.
knife has a pointy triangular tip, which is what we have here.
Write it in pig Latin.
So, knowing that it wouldn't take much force to inflict that wound, knowing that
you remember talking
Kathy has been violent in the past, knowing that she has threatened people in the past,
do you
knowing that she has
10?
attacked other people, isn't it reasonable?
What was that?
She pulled the knife on Collin.
Do I remember what?
There was a long fight over
talking
the
pig
the
Latin.
messiness of that confined space.
Oh God, years ago.
Imagine trying to say
there was
a
a struggle over a knife. And don't you think it's reasonable?
Oh, you get out of here.
And who knows what positions anybody was in? State sure can't prove any. That gravity may have played a part in that little bit of force that was necessary to cause that wound.
I get it. Just put them together like this.
These are interpretations based on what you do know. But don't forget, I don't have to prove exactly what happened. It's the state's responsibility to prove to you beyond reasonable doubt that Collin did not act in self-defense. So
that's the one. Look,
let's talk about what the state may have proved beyond a reasonable doubt.
That's classic. How come Elizabeth?
One,
by
way of stipulation from us, there was no foreign
I cued it up. I like that one. Pool cue.
Yeah,
just kidding. Okay.
I changed it. Yeah. So if you'd used used a hashtag instead of the X, then it would have come through.
Something you have to wait to give it is up to you. But so what does that mean? That means she never scratched Collin with her fingernails. That's it.
YouTube daddy must not like you, Hef.
On the fingernails that they took the swabs from. Why is that important? Why should you?
That was his fault. Our stream got cancelled.
You would expect she would have scratched him with her fingernails if she was
I think,
actually being dragged
Elizabeth
into
might
the
have-
Oh, get out of here.
room, into the kitchen,
What?
and being held against her will.
I missed it.
Teresia just said it.
No DNA.
Teresia
What?
just said it.
Oh, yeah.
The word.
Means no
Yeah.
struggle with just her fingernails. So that piece of evidence does not establish anything beyond a reasonable doubt as far as whether Collin is guilty. You know why else she wouldn't have to scratch him at all? Is if she had control of the knife. Because she doesn't need to scratch him and defend herself with her fingernails because she had the knife first. That actually supports that she pulled the knife on Collin first.
That is a possibility.
They've also proved beyond a reasonable doubt that Kathy had bruises all over her body. Okay. Keep in mind that the lighting in the morgue, when pictures are being taken for evidentiary purposes, are a lot different than pictures you take with your cell phone. There has been zero proof of how Kathy got those bruises. Dr. Garavan can't date them. He said they could have come from innocuous activities like doing chores around the house, like you saw Kathy doing on the night of the 7th. Certainly no evidence to show that Collin somehow inflicted those. So even though they've proved that there are bruises, they have not proved how those bruises occurred. So essentially meaningless. Or another possibility, reasonable interpretation, is that she got bruises while they were struggling over the knife. The state has also proved beyond a reasonable doubt that Collin had blood on him. So what? He had wounds. He performed life-saving CPR on his mother at the instruction of the 911 operator. He held towels on his own shirt to her to try and stop the bleeding. You saw the bloody towels. It also supports that there was a struggle over the knife. It does not support that Collin murdered his mother. The blood on his eyeglasses frame, I hope that was clear when I was asking the crime scene tech that if somebody's holding towels and doing CPR and in this confined space, that they might adjust their glasses and get blood on it that way. But what about the blood on the backpack? Does that prove Collin's a murderer? Absolutely not. Remember I asked the question about the...
Yeah, that there is another contentious issue I've got. All right. So the next thing she does after she's sold his car, cut his phone off, and threatened all this shit to him, she then comes at him and says, right, I'm going to share the CCTV footage of you admitting that you killed your father to him, right? Now, how long has she fucking known about that? How long has she held on to that information? And she's weaponizing it now. That to me makes her an accessory. If she's known that before that phone call, that is all part of the manipulation and shit that she's holding over his head to coercively control him.
The Collin's phone.
Well, that's reason enough for her to.
Kathy's phone could have been in her backpack.
She had to have known about it before then. She couldn't just have gone, oh, I just checked the CCTV feed footage from a year ago and you're admitting to killing your father.
Yeah.
Why bring it up 12 months
Yeah,
later?
well.
You know? Hello?
Exactly.
You can't have it both ways.
And it was Kathy's phone that was used to call 911. So blood being on the backpack doesn't prove Collin's a murderer either. It may prove that Collin, after he tried to stem the bleeding before he called 911,
Yeah,
had to go
she
look
weaponized
for
it, Tricia. She used
the
it against
phone
him.
to call
It was
911.
part of her control.
Yeah,
Or that in
it's
the
right.
struggle over the knife, before he called 911 in that
When it
confined
happens,
space, that's
and you
how
don't
he
have the
got
right to use it as a
No.
weapon. You know,
The
like,
other thing
Makes her an
if you're going to
accessory.
dob him in, do it at the
point
time.
out is that
Yeah.
Collin has
Yep.
said over and over and over and over and over and over, I don't feel safe with my mom. I'm afraid she'll attack me. I'm afraid she'll hurt me and I'll have to defend myself.
Yeah.
They've tried to skew the statements to make it sound like he just walks around going, I'm going to kill my mother, not if she does something to me first. So I want you to think about this. If Collin really wanted to kill his mother,
Why did he
and that
run
he
to his
wasn't acting in
grandma's?
self-defense, Why on earth would he have telegraphed this to every person in authority at any chance he got?
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
He did.
He told people in authority.
I need help. I need help. He was trying to get help.
right.
And they wouldn't keep him longer than 72 hours. Despite him saying, I'm scared that this is going to happen, they sent him home to her.
That if she attacked him, he would defend himself because he was scared. He was scared of what she would do, much like Susan said she was scared of what Kathy would do.
Who
And
opts
also
for a Baker
consider that
Act?
if he, for months, if not
Seriously.
longer, wanted to just kill his mom, and this is a little sick, but there were a number of ways he could have done it that would not have implicated himself, especially after he has told people in authority, if she attacks me,
I could give him a list.
One of the many cruises they went on. Could have
Yeah, it's almost like he admitted it
could have slipped
to everybody,
some of
and
her
then
medication,
why would you do that?
legal
Yeah,
or otherwise, into
exactly.
Doesn't
her
make
drinks.
sense.
Could have shot her. If he was as forcefully strong over Kathy as the state wants you to believe he was,
I don't know. Do you really think he
turned her
thought
back
about it
in
that
her own
long?
home where there were no ring cameras and slit her wrists in the bathtub. And in any of those scenarios, he wouldn't have had.
I don't know how much that has been embellished, Tricia. Like, why would the grandmother be threatened and then stand up and defend him? And why would she shelter him? Why would she get an attorney to represent him against her daughter? That's the testimony of the father, her father, saying that. And the comment was, I've had it with these women, or something like that, or these bitches. And I think that's been taken and run with, because she certainly wasn't scared of him, the grandmother. So I've taken that one with a grain of salt myself.
Had to rely on her coming to him. Her driving.
I'm sure he did, yeah. Every day. Every day she was harassing him. I would have too. I heard her for 10 minutes.
What about
him?
He didn't kill her.
What about if she really did fall on the
Where on
knife?
the body worn camera footage?
That's what I was
don't know.
asking. Whereabouts was the blood? Like, they could have been fighting for it and had it in her hand. And yeah, I don't know. It is
Well, they said it
possible,
was
but
on his shoes and his feet, on his
that would
shorts,
mean
his
he was.
shoes and his
That would
shorts.
that would mean he was standing then, so not laying. So she couldn't have fallen on it. I
But
need to
hang
go
on,
back and have a listen.
we do, because I'm thinking here, well, if he stabbed her, he wouldn't only have it on his shoes and his shorts, mate, he'd have it down his shirt as well.
Well, you would think he's severed the muscle and the artery and the trachea, so it would be arterial spray. He would have it everywhere, especially if he was that close to her.
Well, that's
Like they're
right.
saying, if he
But if he wasn't that close to her, then where would he have it? It was a bit further away. She fell on the knife. The blood went everywhere. Where would he have it? He'd have it on his shoes and shorts.
I suppose if he's kneeling down beside her while she's bleeding out.
Yeah.
Because you think
Oh,
about
he
it,
didn't
if
have a
he's
shirt
standing,
on. Okay.
didn't he? But did he have it all over his chest, all over his
Well,
arms? Like, I
yeah.
need to go back and watch it.
Because I'm just thinking, like, if he only had it on his shorts and his shoes and pretend he did have a shirt on, then, and she fell down onto the knife, well, then that makes sense that she'd only have it up that high, you know what I mean? Because she's there squirting on the ground, bleeding, and his feet are on the ground. You know what I mean? I don't know.
To kill her, but if she attacks me, I will defend myself. The state has proved nothing of significance beyond a reasonable doubt to you, except that Collin and his mom had a very disturbed
He did use a towel. They produced
and
the
also
towels.
perhaps that they never should have been living together. You heard about other family members who were periodically estranged from Kathy. These are all adults with their own lives.
Just ask Elizabeth about
Collin,
the last 3 days of her 9-day bender.
who also clearly wanted to separate himself from his mother.
You weren't here, Tan, were you?
No.
We're having a talk about illicit substances. Elizabeth said, I went on a 9-day bender once and we spent the last 3 days just shagging, but we had to turn the mattress over.
Oh my gosh. And he said squirting on the ground.
Yeah.
I thought he was talking about playing soggy sayo or something.
No. Oh dear.
I'm still a kid. Without the agency or the autonomy
She a dirty bish.
to really sever any connection with her. Right? He's telling people, I don't feel safe. I don't want to go back with my mom. And yet they kept making him do that. It's kind of like someone saying, say, a zoo worker or a circus worker that's responsible for taking care of a lion in a cage. Don't make me go back in that cage with that lion. It's bared its fangs at me. It's reared up at me. But luckily, every time I was able to get out before it attacked me and caused me harm. And the zookeepers and the circus people kept saying, he'll be fine. He'll be fine. Go back in the cage. Go back in the cage. And closing the door behind him. Doesn't mean that the lion is in attack mode all the time. The lion could be majestic and charming to audiences.
What the
Cute,
fruit
even
is this
sometimes.
woman going on about?
Could seem calm, but it was, after all, a violent being.
I'm sure her yeast infection's itching,
Just
mate. Like
because-
this chick.
Poor zoo or circus worker was forced to go back
Well-
into that cage time and time again.
The prosecutor did embellish.
And the lion finally managed to attack him, and he couldn't get
And he
out.
dragged her into the house. Like,
Blame
I want to
pushing
see him
his
drag a
face
lion into the
over and
house.
over and over for defending himself. Each one of the authority figures that Collin begged to take him
A
away
tiny
from his
cute
mother
lady.
ignored him,
Who
failed to protect him.
the hell?
What the hell?
Take your rose-coloured glasses off, love.
They had the power to make Collins statements that he might harm his mom not come true,
Oh, that's right. She did.
and they didn't.
No, with the bag.
So
Oh,
Been
that's
through a
just
lot.
ew.
I'm gonna give you one final thought.
That's even blur.
Again, that Collin is
That's just nasty.
Okay. Unless and until the state can prove beyond a reasonable doubt with evidence and facts that he kidnapped and murdered his mother. So that's like saying you have to start with seeing the vase in black. That's the presumption of innocence. In order for the state to overcome that presumption of innocence, they have to provide you with facts such that you can only see the faces, such that you don't see the vase anymore. If you can see both the faces and the vase, that's reasonable doubt. The state has in no way come close to proving to you beyond a reasonable doubt that only the faces exist. They have failed to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Collin did anything other than defend himself against his mother, and that what he was afraid would happen actually happened. Your verdict has to be not guilty.
One more 10-minute recess. I think you need to finish making your lunch.
I don't know. She didn't
because we'll hear from the
seem
state
as
in a little, and
charismatic,
I'll
you know what I
go
mean?
to the instructions.
As she needed to be.
10 minutes.
All right, please.
He was embellishing a lot, that prosecutor.